Before long, Lisa was in the living room, and she blinked in surprise as she noticed Toyama.
Did I need to make a payment today?
No, I just wanted to speak with you today. Do you have some time right now? As he stood up, Toyama hunched over, and he looked shorter compared to Lisa. Indeed, it looked like only a small matter, but since he said it, I could feel that he really did go out of his way in how he acted. Perhaps this was another manifestation of someone with feet planted on solid ground, I thought to myself, and started seeing Toyama as a grown-up in his own way.
Oh no, I don't mind, but did Hal do something to offend you?
Just as I was thinking about that, Lisa spoke up abruptly. Toyama turned to look at me just as Lisa was, and he laughed quietly before turning back to Lisa. We had an entertaining conversation.
Oh my!
Lisa was actually surprised, but I was a bit hurt by her reaction. What exactly did she think I was, anyway?
But, well, okay, I understand. So you wanted to talk about the loan, then?
No, I'm here to talk about how to grow lilies. Aw. At Toyama's joke, Lisa laughed and nodded disappointedly. For the lender and the lendee, it seemed that they were tied together as if by fate. In that
case, although it's a bit cramped, but please come to my room.
If that is possible, then I would appreciate it. Toyama followed after Lisa. I watched them go when suddenly Lisa stopped and turned towards me.
Hal.
What?
Keep an eye on Hagana, okay?
She had put it that way since there was no telling how Hagana would try to help if she found out that Toyama was in Lisa's room discussing loan terms. Fair point. However, given the exchange from earlier, I didn't know whether or not I'd be able to make any guarantees on my surveillance duties. Or, that's what I wanted to say, but I realized I couldn't really do that, so I just nodded my head half-heartedly. It's possible that perhaps they did show some concern towards me. Before long, Lisa and Toyama ascended the stairs towards the second floor. With me left there, the living room became strangely quiet, so I returned to looking over stocks one by one. My eyes pored over the numbers, but nothing stuck in my head. There are many things I should have thought about, which prevented the limited capacity of my mind to take in any of it. Excuse me. Afterwards, the day became dark as the program changed to night, and it appeared that Toyama had left. Or so it seemed as Lisa came down the steps by herself. He might have gone out through the door on the third floor to avoid running into Hagana. It appeared that it was a discussion that warranted sufficient preparation, and I could see it in Lisa's facial expression when she returned to the living room. It was the first time I'd seen her with an expressionless look as she poured herself a cup of water and just looked at it. She seemed so serious that I couldn't really say anything. Lisa downed half the cup in one go and sighed briefly. She wiped her mouth haphazardly. When she raised her downcast face up, she was back to the usual Lisa.
Why don't I prepare dinner?
But somehow those words sounded tense and tired. I wondered what Toyama's talk was all about. Somehow I didn't think it was a trivial matter of any sort. But even then, Lisa's behavior was kind of as if she had never crossed paths with Toyama ever. Lisa was an adult. I believed that firmly. Thus, without asking any other questions, I just nodded my head. Also, it appeared that the computer terminal on top of the sink really was a trick of Lisa's. I wasn't sure whether that was a good thing or not. What I did know was that when I saw Hagana again at dinner, she disregarded me even more than she did in the morning. Also, my feeling of guilt only increased. Investing had run itself into the ground like a rock. There were now many questions. How would these matters be resolved? I wondered as I lay in bed that night. The next day was a day off. The actual markets were closed. The investment contest virtual markets were likewise closed. Apparently, server maintenance and data aggregation were necessary, and thus I had nothing to do. As for actual trading, I pored over every bit of news in the morning that was of any value or effect. Occasionally, when I looked at the news, it seemed as if something new was happening every day these days. But if you followed the news for at least a week, it was clear that this was not the case. Thus, with nothing better to do, I headed out in the afternoon. It was possible I'd have a run-in with the law if I loitered around here on a weekday afternoon, but that was enough to keep me shut in. But when I was living at home, I would often spend my days outdoors. If I didn't get out and do some exercise from time to time, I'd rot. Besides, I would most likely run into Hagana if I stayed in the church. As for Lisa, after Toyama came by, she unexpectedly had begun to meditate all the time. I packed the computer in my bag and slung it over my shoulder. After tying my shoelaces, I headed up to the 3rd floor and headed out. Today was a clear day, and probably due to the days of rain that washed the atmosphere, I was able to see clearly for a fair distance. The laundry fluttered in part of the 3rd floor yard, while lilies bloomed in the corner. Their numbers diminished because I had pulled some out earlier. Though the landscape in front of me seemed so tranquil, I was bothered by the number of problems that had cropped up. When I thought about them, the vastness and closeness of space right outside of the dome increased vague fears in me. I felt completely alone out here. But the more I thought about it, the more I knew it couldn't be solved. I shook my head and took off, kicking off from roofs and walls. I hadn't decided on where to go. Instead, I had decided on what to do. Oh my.
Kunko?
When I asked the stout old lady selling piping hot steamed buns out front, she handed one with a pair of tongs to a customer and responded, "I don't know whether or not they have a storefront or not."
Ah, the delivery company, I believe. What did you need with them?
I see. Do you know where I should go to meet with them? At 4 mules for one, the minced vegetable and meat bun was a good size and tasty. While having one in lieu of lunch, I asked the old lady at the shop about Chris's whereabouts.
Just a minute. Let's see now. Since today is Sunday...
I can't hold a voice for this one.
If you're looking for Chris, she's out on the 3rd block doing a delivery.
The answer came from a customer passing by who'd overheard my question. 3rd block?
Yep, over by the tunnel that connects to the 5th outer section. On off days, she's usually over there lazing about.
Ah, over there, huh? It was a favorite spot of mine. The old man who gave me that information proceeded to purchase 5 steamed buns. The old lady quickly restocked the steamer with fresh buns. Thanks, I'll be off now.
Sure. Old lady, give me a few of the big ones, will ya?
I heard the old man joke around as I turned around, stuffed the bun in my mouth, and prepared to run off. I was stopped by the old lady who had handed the buns to the old man.
Ah, wait a moment.
In films I've seen, there would always be someone playing the thief who would say something like, "What kind of idiot would stop when told to stop?" Ever since I left home and gotten used to being chased, those words had a strong impact on me. That was why I hesitated for a moment, switching into a stance where I could run away at moment's notice, and turned around. When I did that, the old lady took her tongs and placed a bun in front of me.
If you're going to meet with Chris, please hand this to her. That girl, she's a bit too skinny if you ask me.
The words of the old lady, whose face was round like her steamed buns, was enough to persuade me. I nodded obediently and took the paper, wrapped piping hot bun. I will be sure to give it to her.
I'm counting on you.
She didn't even ask for money, so there was no reason for me to be suspicious. At the side of the shop was a stray cat napping in the glow of the sun. Certainly didn't dislike this kind of atmosphere on the outside. The pompous denizens of the White Belt, though they lived in a nice area, were certainly not this open. Everyone was suspicious of each other, and the mood showed it. Naturally, the residents of the White Belt who made up the middle and upper class of society were always in constant competition with each other in Newton City, so that was probably to be expected. But if I could become just as dull as them by getting wrapped up in this competition, then I had better exercise caution. As I thought about that, I ran towards the third block as mentioned to me earlier. On the lunar surface, the temperature and humidity level were fairly consistent year-round. I heard it was most similar to spring on Earth. The temperature and weather made for a glorious day, I felt. Enough to make you perspire when exercising after eating a meal. After holing myself up in my room for a week, I was ready for some release as I leapt, hopped, and navigated the extreme highs and lows of this town. One reason I enjoyed exercise, outside of the fact that I had learned how useful it was to condition my body, was that I put away distracting thoughts when in motion as I pushed forward. To be able to fly through the air through this town on a nice afternoon was a great, indescribable feeling. I leapt from rooftop to rooftop, and soon I was at a cliff, in the third block connecting to the fifth outer section. The only way up was a rough path that ran around the edge. But I had no intention of going that way, so I ran like a cat up the side of the wall. Due to the low gravity, there were traffic signs by the cliffs for the sake of others who'd do the same thing. I used the sign as a stepping stone to take one more flying leap. Just at that moment, an old lady on an electric scooter came out of the tunnel from the direction of the fifth outer section, and seeing me jump up from the bottom of the cliff did startle her a bit. As for me, I thought nothing of it, and once I reached the road, I looked towards the sixth outer section. They said that she was in this area making a delivery, but I couldn't see her from up here. Just as I had thought about that while I stared out in the distance, I heard a voice above and behind me.
Ah!
I turned around towards that familiar voice, and sitting on top of the tunnel was Chris. Next to her was a large bag, and in her hands was that beat-up terminal of hers she'd carry around. Thinking that I was pretty lucky to find her this quickly, I grabbed the bun that the old lady gave me and chucked it at Chris without saying a word.
What?
It's from the old lady at the steamed bun shop. Told you to eat up.
Ah, I see.
While Chris looked at the wrapped package in confusion, she swallowed the saliva in her mouth. Just as I always did, I leapt towards the tree on the side of the road. Then, using that as a foothold, I did a 3-point jump and leapt to the top of the tunnel. Chris peeled away the paper timidly, and didn't seem at all surprised as I leapt up to her. Perhaps Chris also moved like I did when she made her deliveries.
Aw, she looks so happy.
What are you doing here? I asked my question just as Chris bit into the bun. Due to the timing, Chris became flustered, a large chunk of the bun in her mouth. Oh, sorry, no need to be in a panic. Chris nodded dutifully, and after munching for a bit, she gulped with satisfaction. So, what are you doing here? I asked her once more, and Chris poured something out of her canteen into a cup before answering.
I'm studying.
But isn't it Sunday?
Yes.
I was just intending to make small talk, but somehow Chris took that to mean that she was somehow in the wrong and looked downcast. Aw. I was a bit surprised as I continued. No, well, there's nothing wrong with that, I think. You're studying math, right?
Yes.
That's pretty cool.
Huh?
When it comes to studying, I always felt it was something you did in a darkened room just grinding away. But to study out here in a relaxed manner is, well, pretty cool. That was not entirely a lie. Lisa had once told me about a great artist or something who could seek out good places to isolate themselves in order to think through an important problem. But what I saw in front of me was entirely different from what I imagined. There was a large bag next to her, which made it seem as if she was just taking a break on the way to a delivery. Looked like she was using it as a cushion. In her hand was a canteen. And while taking occasional sips from the steaming, warm-looking tea in her cup, she seemed to be in deep thought as she looked at the beautiful scenery in front of her. This relaxing atmosphere was perfectly fitting for a calm girl like Chris, I realized.
What?
However, it seemed that Chris wasn't used to being praised like that. She looked away rather anxiously before becoming downcast again. But even then, it was easy to see from her reddened face that she didn't exactly hate that either. In any case, your bun is going to get cold. When I said that, she took a fleeting glimpse at the steamed bun, then looked at me again before looking back down. She then timidly started eating the bun. She was just like a small creature, and I had to hold back to keep from teasing her. Yeah, please do. I knew that Chris felt somewhat awkward as I stood up and gazed out at the scenery from the top of the tunnel. However, it appeared that Chris had finally gotten over her timidness, and she bravely stuffed her cheeks with the bun. I saw a good opening at that moment to break the ice. Hey, there's something I want to ask you. Her obedient reply contrasted sharply with the fact that she was talking with her mouth full. Her lips had some bits of minced meat on them, and she wiped her mouth hurriedly when I pointed it out. You're friendly with Hagana, right? Our family's cat, even when examined by the mass observation equipment on the orbital elevator, was probably just a stray that survived hitching a ride to the moon, despite decompression and low temperatures. But when you splashed water in its face, it looked at you like she was looking at me now. But our cat could leap at me angrily when it came to its senses. Chris looked at me with upturned eyes, seemingly asking me if I was angry at her. So, there's something I wanted to ask. Since I had been standing while Chris had been sitting, I was physically looking down at her, and I averted my eyes for the first time. Though I realized that this was kind of pitiful, I guess I really was feeling awkward asking a question like that. Do you happen to know what Hagana likes? I tried to figure out the quickest way to resolve the unfathomable situation eating away at me, and this was my solution. She started to talk, but apparently she then realized that there was still some of that bun in her mouth. She closed her eyes in confusion before chewing and swallowing the rest of it, and sighed in relief before rephrasing what she was going to say.
You're talking about Miss Hagana?
Yeah. You look like you come to the church often, so do you know anything? Chris looked dumbfounded as she looked up at me, looking at me with innocent eyes as though wondering what I was trying to say. I was still feeling awkward and didn't look back at Chris, so in her Chris-like way she must have thought that she had some strange misunderstanding of the situation, as her cheeks suddenly turned red and she clasped her hands together.
Well, for Miss Hagana...
Don't get the wrong idea here. I brought my face closer, no, in a threatening manner. Chris closed her eyes quickly and brought her hands up over her head in defense as she curled up, but of course I wasn't going to hit her. I sat her up and she opened one eye and looked up at me cautiously. Well, because of a simple mistake, I did something bad to Hagana.
Something bad?
A lot happened. I had a sour expression as I said it, which caused Chris to avert her eyes somewhat as she spoke timidly.
So, well, it's something to give her by way of an apology, right?
In the simplest sense, yes.
Ah.
As Chris said it, her expression changed. She had a distant look on her face as if she was thinking about something, but perhaps because she usually came here to think about math problems, it was more extreme. Just a quick glimpse at her made it hard to tell if she was a guy or a girl. Looking at her like that, though, I somehow had this feeling that someday she'd grow up to be a very beautiful woman. Kind of an odd thought while trying to figure out what to get Hagana, but okay. With the sound of a small motor, a single-passenger electric bike left the tunnel. That was when Chris looked at me and spoke.
You're a good person, aren't you?
Huh? My response might have been unintentionally strong, but Chris fell back suddenly, and I could hear her start to giggle and laugh. Doesn't matter whether I'm a good guy or a bad guy, so do you have any ideas or not?
Yes, things Miss Hagana likes, right?
She said this obediently and with some hesitation. Something this annoying was definitely a very girlish trait. I must definitely be bad when it comes to girls. No matter the situation, I hated how I felt like a kid when there was a girl in front of me.
She doesn't really say much about this sort of stuff.
Anything works. Anything that she might have an interest in, perhaps.
Something she has an interest,
Since she seemed to have a frank personality, perhaps this kind of talk didn't happen often. But, as I waited patiently as Chris pondered this matter, Chris looked up suddenly and said something.
Ah.
You thought of something?
No, well...
What? At my question, Chris pointed towards the front of the road at the bottom of the tunnel and then spoke.
There's Miss Hagana.
I looked out in front of me and it did appear that Hagana was on the path heading our way. Thanks to the slope of the hill, it did not appear that she knew that I was there. I was panicked as I realized that things would be bad if she saw me here. Keep quiet about me coming here. After I said that to Chris, I turned towards the cliff behind me and leapt into the thicket of trees there. Chris followed me with her eyes as I went, but before long she could hear Hagana calling out to her, and she turned around in a panic. However, Hagana wasn't about to ascend to the top of the tunnel, so Chris gathered up her things, headed down, and disappeared from sight. Hagana's timing was rather annoying, but it was just a matter of finding another opportunity to talk to Chris. It was possible that she was sharper than I took her for, and would discreetly try to get Hagana to tell her about her interests. I held on to that hope as I hid myself within the space between the unnaturally planted giant trees. But I couldn't stop wondering how Hagana had happened upon this place all of a sudden. There's no way that she would have come looking for me, so perhaps Hagana needed to talk to Chris. Perhaps it was about her studies. That's what I thought, but remembering how Hagana looked as she walked down the path, I wonder if there was not something else on her mind. It's not that I wouldn't be able to eavesdrop on them if I tried, but there would be no way to talk my way out of it if I were to be discovered. So I meekly took a detour and headed back to the church. And we're going to leave that there for this episode. I was really hoping we'd get an answer out of Chris. Just what does Hagana like? How are we going to resolve this? Because we need to resolve this. We need to get Hagana at least neutral, if not friendly, with Hal. That would be nice. But we're going to have to wait until next time to find out just what we do to figure that out. Thank you for joining me for this episode. As always, subscribe if you haven't already so you can find out when the next episodes are posted. Hit that thumbs up. post a comment of what you think is going to happen next or how things have been going. And until next week, go be creative. Before long, Lisa was in the living room, and she blinked in surprise as she noticed Toyama.
Eh? Did I need to make a payment today?
No, I just wanted to speak with you today. Do you have some time right now? As he stood up, Toyama hunched over. Just as I was thinking about that, Lisa spoke up abruptly. Toyama turned to look at me just as Lisa was, and he laughed quietly before turning back to Lisa. We had an entertaining conversation.
Oh my!
Lisa was actually surprised, but I was a bit hurt by her reaction. What exactly did she think I was, anyway?
But, well, okay, I understand. So you wanted to talk about...
And he looked shorter compared to Lisa. Indeed, it looked like only a small matter, but since he said it, I could feel that he really did go out of his way in how he acted. Perhaps this was another manifestation of someone with feet planted on solid ground, I thought to myself, and started seeing Toyama as a grown-up in his own way.
Oh no, I don't mind, but did Hal do something to offend you? About the loan, then?
No, I'm here to talk about how to grow lilies. Aw. At Toyama's joke, Lisa laughed and nodded disappointedly. For the lender and the lendee, it seemed that they were tied together as if by fate. In that
case, although it's a bit cramped, but please come to my room.
If that is possible, then I would appreciate it. Toyama followed after Lisa. I watched them go when suddenly Lisa stopped and turned towards me.
Hal.
What?
Keep an eye on Hagana, okay?
She had put it that way since there was no telling how Hagana would try to help if she found out that Toyama was in Lisa's room discussing loan terms.